On the transfer of power in this election, the former President Trump said, of course, there will be a peaceful transfer. He painted a pretty dark picture, Hallie, of this country. I'll read a few quotes. We're in great danger of being in World War III. We could be close to the Depression of the 1929 variety. We have a sick country. He said the stock market crash was just the beginning. If you want to pick it up from there, and then I'd like to fact check a few things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The ominous tone that you describe here, Kate, is part and parcel of what we have seen from former President Trump, not just this campaign, but even dating back to his first run for the White House. In his inauguration speech, of course, back in 2017, you mentioned some of those key quotes here. There's some other news he's making as well here. Notably, and I think we should say it, on the debates. This has been a question of whether or not former President Trump would take the debate stage against Kamala Harris, and I would say against the vice president. We have maybe half an answer here, which is that the former president says that he will, in fact, debate on September 10th on ABC News. He has agreed to that, and on September 25th with NBC News. I will say that we have not heard. We have reached out to the White House, to the Harris campaign for comment. We have not heard as to whether she has agreed to those debates and if those, in fact, will move forward. The former president also mentioned September 4th on Fox. That is another one that we're watching for as well. Unlikely that the Harris campaign is doing that. That seems off the table at this point. But we are going to continue to report that out and see what we get. I will just mention for folks who are going, wait a second, Hallie, those are different dates than what Donald Trump said. He mixed up the September 10th and September 25th date, according to his campaign, which moved quickly to correct that and let our team know. So we're watching to see if those debates will, in fact, materialize. On policy, there's some other highlights as well here. Our Garrett Haake was in the room, and I will just acknowledge it was hard to hear those questions. It wasn't just you. It wasn't just your TV. It didn't appear that the reporters, most of them, had microphones. So the former president was straining to hear. I think folks at home may have been straining to hear as well. Our Garrett Haake was in the room and asked about something that is going to become, in the eyes of Democrats, a big issue come November, and that is the issue of abortion access and reproductive rights. You heard the former president suggest that he did not think that that was going to be a big factor in November. I can tell you that Democrats disagree. They saw how mobilizing it was for Democrats back in the midterm. They believe that they can capture potentially that energy again come November and get folks to turn out. And to that end, when Garrett asked about the FDA potentially revoking access to mifepristone, if I heard him correctly, the former president did not rule that out. So I would watch for that to become maybe something that we continue to follow here moving forward. I will tick through a couple of sort of things that were said that were not true, Kate, and there were a number of them in there, but just to kind of go through a few of them. On Harris, he suggested the vice president wants to take away everybody's guns. The reality is she has called that a false choice. She's backed some restrictions, including on assault weapons. On taxes, he claimed responsibility for the biggest tax cut in history. That's not the case. On inflation, he suggested that, for example, groceries are up 50 to 60%. Not true. It's less than half that. On Georgia, reputable polls show that race is very close, very competitive. He did not win that state in 2020, of course. He talked about his margins in South Carolina. Those were not record-setting. On January 6th, he said nobody died. That is not true. On his base, he suggested that it's 75% of the country. No polling indicates that, nor does of course, popular vote over the course of the last couple elections. On abortion, he said the Democrats support abortion after birth. That is illegal. On those lock her up chants, he suggested he tried to tamp them down when they happened during his 26th campaign against former First Lady Hillary Clinton, former Secretary of State. That is also not the case. And in fact, the former president echoed those chants as well. So just a bit of that. I know it's a lot, but there was a lot there in that fairly lengthy, what turned out to be a news conference where he did, in fact, take questions from the reporters in the room.
That's right. And it went about an hour and 5 minutes, if my math is right. I want to add a couple and jump in here, Hallie, if you have anything to add. On immigration, the former president again said that 20 million people have come over the border during the Biden administration. The Washington Post reports an average of 2 million a year between 2021 and 23. We don't have this year's numbers yet, but so 2 million a year does not add up to 20 million. You mentioned Harris. He made a lot of negative comments about the vice president, including crowd sizes, which I think is pretty hard for us to fact check on the fly, but certainly seemed to overstate his crowd sizes to me. On Afghanistan, the former president said that weapons and equipment were left behind in Afghanistan, which the Department of Defense has acknowledged. He said it was $85 billion worth, and the DOD report says, the Department of Defense says it's $7 billion. So just another fact check. You mentioned the abortion issue. He said that Governor Walz, the vice presidential candidate, agrees with late-term abortion. If I'm correct to either of you, I don't think he has actually talked about that or spoken about that. The Minnesota law does not have a limit in terms of time on when a woman can seek an abortion. It allows it openly without any kind of time limit. Does that sound right to you, Hallie?
There's also, Kate, yes, Kate, well, and we're checking on that as well. But again, this idea of late-term abortion, Democrats would push back on that incredibly strongly to suggest that that is not something that is common in this country. It is not. There's so much more the focus, of course, on those first 24 weeks after, of course, the overturning of Roe versus Wade, that milestone abortion rights law. I would also say, Kate, there's some other news that the former president is making as it relates to what I'm going to call strategy or process, if you will, in this campaign, because he several times denigrated in very personal terms Vice President Harris on her intelligence, again, raised questions about her race and identity, as he did during that NABJ sort of roundtable that we saw, I think it was last week. But he also talked about how he sees this campaign moving forward. He referenced that he believed that this so-called Harris honeymoon, the energy and the enthusiasm that she has seen is not going to last, said that, she's got this convention coming up. We'll see what happens after that. But also did something interesting, because his campaign and those around him, allies of his, have publicly come out and suggested that it would be a better choice for the former president to focus on policy and not personality attacks. He alluded to that after about an hour of attacking Harris at times in personal terms, Kate. So the strategy piece of this is interesting here as you also look at what happens moving forward, as he suggests that this race is extremely close, that he's in a good position for that. Again, we know what the polling shows, which is that it is very competitive, basically a dead heat in the key battlegrounds that are going to matter.
Dasha, I don't want to leave you out here. Let me go over to Dasha, who covers the Trump campaign often for us, is out in the field often at these rallies. So Mr. Trump was asked why he hasn't been on the campaign trail over the last few days. Talk about how he explained that and what you're hearing from the campaign about their strategy.
Well, he took issue with that question, first of all, and then he said that he feels he doesn't need to be out on the trail all of the time because he feels he's leading by so much. He said that he's going to Montana, for example, not for his sake because he has that state on lock, but to help down ballot candidates. He's also talked about how he's been taping interviews, taking questions from the press, as he just did there. Of course, that press conference is a rare one for him. It's very rare that he takes questions from media that is not, let's just put it, friendly media to him. He takes some questions offhand at some off-the-record stops, but it's typically in a more chaotic environment where it's difficult to do follow-ups. And so that is a line of criticism, though, that he's trying to use against Harris, saying she hasn't been taking questions from the media, that her appearances so far have been quite scripted. He says he feels more comfortable and more engaged with the press and with the public than she does. I do think that's going to be a continued line of attack for him, and we'll see how the Harris campaign responds if and when she does sit down for an interview. She, of course, has not done an interview with mainstream media outlets since she became the nominee, Kate.
Yeah, and our Michelle Sindor was reporting earlier today that the Harris campaign very much is thinking about doing some interviews in the next several weeks. Hallie, I think if I remember correctly, former President Trump actually insulted Harris's intelligence and said she's not smart enough to do a press conference like this. Can we talk about the Harris campaign and how they might respond to all of this and sort of what the state is of play with them? I want to just note, to be very, transparent about how we operate here. If Vice President Harris holds a press conference, Hallie, we will certainly cover that live as well, just so people know we try to be, equal time about all of this.
Well, and it would also be a newsworthy event, Kate. And you're absolutely right about that. Listen, we as far as the vice president, and you heard that, Kate, repeatedly, the former president insult her intelligence in personal terms. They have already come out, even before this news conference began, to suggest that Donald Trump, frustrated with the lack of attention that he's getting, is essentially, in their words, throwing a temper tantrum in front of the media at Mar-a-Lago there, at his club, as you just saw, at his Florida home, essentially. They have been obviously very critical of this moment, suggesting that this is simply an attention-seeking spotlight grab for Mr. Trump here.